Okay, let's jump right into this. In today's explainer, we're stepping straight into the shadows to explore a really incredible, grim, dark, gothic fable about the very real dangers of rigid perfection. We're diving into a fascinating source text called The Dissolution of the Iron Script. We'll be unpacking the deep philosophy here, and specifically the philology, the actual words used to build this dark, totally isolated world. We're going to see exactly how an absolute demand for control can actually become the ultimate trap. Right off the bat, I want you to picture a figure known only as the Wanderer. He's standing alone in the Gothic dusk, and he's just completely paralyzed by his own relentless need for control. He shouts this absolutely despairing question out into the void: why does my hand refuse to dance upon the page? It's such a powerful hook, right? It's this agonizing, echoing cry of a creator who is completely trapped by his own absolute certainty. He's a writer whose strict adherence to the rules has just frozen his art solid. Imagine this entire scene painted in these stark, dark watercolor textures. The Wanderer is sitting there in the absolute freezing dark of what he calls his infinite dungeon. And what's around him? Just endless, crumbling libraries full of abandoned drafts. It's tragic because every precise line he tries to etch onto the page literally just reinforces the walls of his self-imposed cage. He's a playwright, but he's completely forgotten a crucial truth. To make the stars sing, you actually have to be willing to plunge into the chaotic unknown. Let's systematically break down this rigid intellectual armor he's using to trap himself. Think of it as an archipicture of isolation with three main pillars. First up, his tool. It's a pen of iron. Think about that. It's not a tool of creation, it's a heavy, manifest weight of negation. Then there's his setting, these gray blueprints, representing constructs of absolute unbending certainty. And his mindset? Calcified cathedrals. It's a merciless intellect, totally devoid of any real tempest or emotion. He calls himself the master of the storm, but honestly, there's no storm left for him to command. And here is the tragic irony of the whole situation. The text actually describes his own shadow detaching from his heels, just to whisper this really dark truth to him. It tells him his precise equations of isolation had merely hammered the lid onto his own creative tomb. His total obsession with ultimate control hasn't made him a master at all. It's actively starved his soul and completely walled him off from life. That brings us to Act 2, unmasking the paper protagonist. This is where the story completely shifts gears. A massive philosophical clash starts brewing between the Wanderer's demand for absolute order and this wild, disruptive new force. Out of nowhere, a transformative character known as the Wit emerges directly from the white, uncharted spaces of the map. And the Wit basically acts as a distorting mirror, perfectly reflecting the Wanderer's incredibly brittle mask of authority. This eldest sibling arrives to completely challenge the rigid, straight lines of that dark watercolor landscape we talked about, threatening to just wash it all away. And let me tell you, the Wit does not hold back. With this cynical laughter that the text says resonates at the frequency of falling idols, the sibling completely shatters the Wanderer's pride. He mocks him, saying, "You believe your script is a mutable stone, little king, but look closely at your trembling hands." I mean, wow. It is a devastating blow to a guy who genuinely thought he held all the power. Let's track how this rapid, Nietzschean unmasking actually unfolds, step by step. Step 1, the Wit simply taps the Wanderer's brow. Step 2, all that calcified intellectual armor he spent literally lifetimes forging, it just collapses into a heap of delightful absurdity. And Step 3, the iron hammer of genealogy dissolves into a mere ink smudge. Through these incredibly haunting visual metaphors, we literally see the iron ink dissolving into chaos. It proves that the protagonist's massive pride was, all along, just papier-mâché. The core philosophy the Wit leaves behind is a really stark warning for all of us. The sibling declares that any truth held too tightly becomes the very dungeon that starves the soul of its fire. Think about the philology there for a second. The specific use of the phrases held too tightly and dungeon. It really makes you wonder, right? What truths in your own life are you holding on to so rigidly that they've actually become a prison? Which brings us to Act 3. The liquid plot consumes. Now we're entering the absolute darkest, most chaotic part of this explainer. The story introduces this terrifying new entity and a state of being called the liquid plot. It's defined as a state where the precise definitions of justice and debt literally liquefy into a wet, black slurry. This force called the hunger creeps out from the corners of the amphitheater, turning the Wanderer's rigid mental landscape into a terrifying cacophony of, "Wait, how did this happen?" as all the foundational rules of his universe just break down and melt away. And the crazy thing is, the hunger doesn't use logic to debate the Wanderer. It couldn't care less about his architecture or his gray blueprints. It just growls, "Your fortress of reason is but a thread for my consumption." It effortlessly inhales the threads of order and all those precise equations that were supposed to govern the script's tragic climax. It just swallows his expectations whole. No debate, just consumption. But notice the duality of this chaos. The source text calls this flood the ink of negation. At first glance, it sounds purely destructive, right? A dark flood washing away isolation. But look at the second part of that idea. It ensures that the boundaries of the mind can never again set into permanent, suffocating stone. This terrifying flood of black slurry is actually a violent but completely necessary mechanism for his liberation. It is washing away that self-imposed dungeon. Let's move into Act 4, the Jester's final improvisation. Okay, so the heavy, grim, dark tone of those crumbling libraries finally breaks here. It gives way to this beautiful spark of liberating, entirely unscripted lightness. A tiny, super unpredictable force called the Small darts across the now living page. And it introduces this gentle hiccup into the rhythm of the universe. With just one artful mistake, it alters a rigid decree of execution into a decree of dessert. Yeah, it's completely absurd, but it acts as this fresh breeze that reminds the wanderer's calcified bones exactly how to dance amidst the ruins of his fallen cathedrals. This is a total transformation. Think about the stark difference between where he started and where he is now. On one hand, you have his past, the stagnant void. It's characterized by an iron pen, immutable stone, and gray blueprints. Then, on the other hand, you have his present, the open stage. He looks down and finds that his heavy iron pen has melted into a wooden jester's wand. It's now a tool of absolute freedom, relying on wet ink and beautiful, messy improvisation. It's a complete 180. Armed with this newfound freedom and his wooden wand, the wanderer lets out this amazing, triumphant cry. I shall write the next line. He isn't paralyzed by the dark anymore. He's not obsessed with perfection. He is actively creating, improvising, and he addresses this declaration out to an invisible audience that the text calls the last men. But who exactly are these last men? Well, they huddle in their gray blueprints of wretched contentment. And this is really the lingering tragedy of the fable. Because while the wanderer has been liberated by the chaos of the liquid plot and finally learned to improvise, the last men remain totally trapped. They actively refuse to let go of their forced order, preferring the safety of a suffocating cage over the terrifying, dynamic freedom of the open stage. For the wanderer, though, the tragedy of forced order finally surrenders to the messy, unscripted improvisation of the soul. The ink is wet, the script is definitely no longer iron. Imagine those dark watercolor clouds completely parting because the stage is finally, gloriously open to the singing stars. He has finally embraced the tempest. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative question. What gray blueprints of wretched contentment are currently suffocating your own creative soul? Think about where in your life you might be demanding just a little too much perfection, because sometimes you really do have to let the iron script dissolve so you can remember how to dance. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today. Stay curious, stay flexible, and we'll see you next time.